was she would be interested in him. Did I word that correctly? Any woman that Doug was interested in, or any woman that was interested in Doug, she would, like, kind of stalk to, like, see if they were worthy of her son. So she would do stuff like that, and it probably has to do with the fact that she lost one of her sons at a very early age, which kind of, like, drove her to be very protective of Doug, who was the youngest of her sons. So that's probably why she was so weird. Yeah. What about the bonus army demonstrations? What about them? I covered them in the first episode. I think I covered them as best as I could. It was probably the darkest blot on his record, an indefensible action, completely influenced by hysteria. You know, it basically, I consider it an unforgivable act, and it's one of the things that in my view, keeps him from being rated among, like, the best of American generals, just because, like, it was such a heinous act, and I can't state it strongly enough how terrible of an act that it was. The fact that these men served alongside him, and then he just gunned them down in the streets based off of zero evidence. I hate talking about it. I really do, because it upsets me to such a degree, because it really does show such a disconnect between the average man on the ground soldier and the upper echelons of leadership. And as somebody who has served in the military themselves, it really, really pisses me off. And it's one of the reasons, like I said, it's the darkest spot on his record, and I don't think any amount of victories could, overshadow that. And it's, yeah. I just get so upset talking about it, thinking about it. So I'm going to move on from this question. But if you want to know more about the bonus army demonstrations, I talk about them in episode 1. All right. This is the last question, and I think it's a really good one. In your opinion, do you think this man was completely driven by ego? No, I don't. That's the short answer. The long answer is, early in his career, he definitely wasn't. All the way up into him getting his first star, and even really up until he becomes the chief of staff. I don't really see... Obviously, there's always going to be some level of ego with military officers, typically. No man is above that, especially when you've accomplished so much. But to say he was completely driven by ego, especially in the first half of his career, I think is overstating to a pretty high degree. He was an excellent soldier. He really was, as a junior officer, as a field commander, and he was, to say he was driven by ego, I think overshadows the fact that he was absolutely driven by his father's service. I think this man was a genuine patriot. He loved his country without a doubt. He was a smart man. They don't give 5 stars to everybody. Really, that ego that he becomes known for doesn't really manifest itself until he becomes the chief of staff in the years later. Obviously, you start to see it more once he goes to the Philippines. It demands he becomes he's named a field marshal in the Filipino military. You definitely see it in the Second World War when the media takes a liking to him, and that just fuels the fire, and you really see it come to a head in the Korean War, and it's really the reason why he ends up getting removed by Truman. But then you don't really see it as much, post-1952, once the Eisenhower is elected and it's clear that he's never going to, get a Republican nomination for president. You don't really see that side of MacArthur anymore. he's very he's a wise man in his later years. The way he advises JFK, he like I said in the second episode, he is one of the driving forces to like stop JFK from escalating in Vietnam. So yeah, I don't think he was completely driven by ego. I think it was a driving force probably during the war years of World War II in Korea. He let himself get a little bit too obsessed with himself, and it had a negative impact on some brilliant field commanders. I talked about that a bit in the second episode. But no, I don't think he was completely driven by ego. He definitely basked in becoming a 5-star and getting that Medal of Honor, though. So, I mean, out of all the U.S. generals, as far as biggest egos go, I think he's pretty on par. It's just his is like pretty on par with his contemporaries. I think that his is just so well known, and to have such a negative effect. The only other men I think had such a negative impact from their ego on their career was probably Patton, and the way he operated specifically in Sicily. And we'll talk about that in a future episode. But yeah, it was really just something that happened from like 1930 on to like 1951. That's really the years of when his ego was like really causing problems for him. But I don't really think he was completely driven by ego. I think he was driven by a serious devotion to his country, and he served it well for most of his career. I know I just stopped talking about the bonus army demonstrations and like what a dark spot that is on his record, but at the same time, you cannot understate, or you should not understate, the contributions that this man made to the U.S. military, the things that he did at West Point to reform the academy, the way he led troops during the Second World War, the way that he almost completely won in Korea had he not, ignored the Chinese invasion. He was a military genius for sure. So I don't want anyone to think that I have such a negative view of this man. It's just he would let his ego get the better of him a lot of times, but no, I don't think he was completely driven by ego. I think I've stated that enough times in the past 3 minutes. Yeah. But his image is definitely his image that is taught in contemporary history is really based around the fact that he did have such a big ego. And I mean, any picture that you see of him, he's got that corncob pipe. He's got the those aviator sunglasses on. I mean, he definitely was a driving factor, for sure. All right, that's all the questions that I'm gonna do today. I'm gonna apologize again for how late this episode was getting out. It's a shorter episode, I know, and I've talked probably too much about MacArthur at this point. It's driving me crazy. I'm sure it's driving you guys crazy. I promise the next episode will not be about Doug MacArthur. I promise. I hope to have that episode out before the first of the year, but I can't make any promises just with the way the holiday season is. I'm sure all of you have plans for travel, stuff like that. I'm no different. I've got to drive halfway across the country, and it's going to take up a lot of the next week and a half. But I do plan on, like I said, having a new episode out before the first of the year. If not, I will see you all after Christmas. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Kwanzaa to those who celebrate, and a Happy Hanukkah. And if I don't get the episode out before the first, also have a Happy New Year. Thank you guys for listening.